I had a dream a few days ago, or maybe it was more of an experience. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and just looking around my room. This wasn't unusual by any means. There have been many times I woke up in the middle of the night, but this time it would be a little bit different. I remember laying there in my bed and all of a sudden a voice or something came into my ears. All it simply said was that something is watching you. Then there was a sudden rush of music and silence. I spent the next few moments just sitting in my bed, frightened, frozen, looking around, thinking what that was. I remember falling asleep a few minutes later and eventually waking up in the morning. I would spend the next day thinking to myself, what was that? What happened? Was that a dream or was it real? It couldn't be real. It was so ridiculous, so nonsensical. But it felt real. It felt so different from my other dreams. The voice felt real. Even to this day, I'm not entirely sure. Was I really hearing a voice in my head, or was it just a silly dream? You know what's interesting, and the reason why I even bring this up, is that it actually reminded me of a creepypasta that I had read before, and I decided to read again. And it actually kind of inspired me to make this video. So, if you guys don't know, today I'm going to talk about quite a popular creepypasta called Psychosis, written about 10 years ago from today. Now, if you guys don't know, psychosis is a term used to describe when people lose contact with reality. Common symptoms of psychosis are hearing voices, having strong beliefs that are not shared by people within your community. I do kind of think to myself whether or not, was that what I was suffering? I mean, I do remember hearing a voice, but it definitely was a one-off thing. Never happened before or since. But the character that I'm going to talk about in this story today definitely suffered from it. Now, if you guys don't know, Psychosis is written in the format of a journal. It's a journal kept by the main character, John. He begins his first entry on Sunday and eventually continues to write in it throughout the week till Friday, with the last entry eventually being made on an unknown date. Throughout this story, you see John himself suffer from psychosis. He thinks he's seeing things, hearing things. He can't prove anything, but he thinks something weird is going on. You see throughout this story him slowly descending into more and more paranoia, fear, and delusions. Now in this video, I'm going to summarize the entire story, do a little bit of analysis, give you my opinion, and kind of explain what's going on. So I hope you enjoy the journey. So the first entry starts on a Sunday. John sits down at his table to start writing down his thoughts. The reason why he's starting this journal is that he's been noticing strange things in the last few days. And he thinks that by writing it down in this journal, he can organize his thoughts, kind of just sit back and kind of really just get them all together and figure out what's going on. Now the reason why he's writing in a journal and not typing on a computer, because John for some reason thinks that someone could get on the computer and change things. But who is this? Who could do this? John isn't exactly sure. At this point, he just has a bad feeling about something. To give you some background on John himself is actually in school right now, or college to be specific. He's studying programming and has been cooped up in his apartment for the last few days working on a project. He hasn't been outside, he hasn't seen anyone face to face, or really even talked that much with anybody. Most of the people online are AFK, away, offline, the only interaction being an email that he had with a friend the day before, telling him that he would get back to him after he got back from the store. But of course, John has heard nothing from him since. Now John lives in an apartment that is actually located in the basement of his facility. He has no windows, no access to fresh air, and he's the only one living in the basement, completely isolated. In fact, John writes the following in his journal. I'm not sure when I first started to feel like something was odd. I can't even define what it is. Maybe I just haven't talked to anyone in a while. That's the first thing that crept up on me. Everyone I normally talk to online while I program has been idle, or they're simply not logged in at all. My instant messages go unanswered. My last email I got from anybody was from a friend saying he talked to me when he got back from the store, and that was yesterday. I'd call with my cell phone, but reception's terrible down here. Yeah, that's it. I just need to call someone. I'm going to go outside. And as you can see here, he's had next to no social interactions. You know, like he said, his messages are going unanswered. A friend emailed him but never got back to him. So at this point, he wants interactions. He wants to speak to someone. So he decides to get out of his apartment, go upstairs so he can get a cell phone signal, and finally get a chance to talk. Again, throughout this story, we see that one of the main things John desires is to speak to someone real, hear their voice, see their face. In order to achieve this, he has to do something that most of us internet dwellers never want to do: leave our rooms and go outside. Now, as he heads out, he opens his door and immediately notices a weird feeling. Just like before, he can't exactly put his finger on it. He doesn't really know what's wrong. He just knows that something's wrong. Before heading upstairs, John does describe the outside hallway. He talks about how he's completely alone, no one else is down here, and the only thing to keep him company is the hum of 2 soda machines at the end of the hallway. Of course, we don't exactly know why there's 2 soda machines down here when there's only one person. Apparently, according to John, he once tried to get a soda out of there, and it was 2 years expired. Something tells him that the landlord just keeps them down there for storage. Maybe originally his apartment was storage, but the landlord wanted to make a little bit more money, so he decided to clear it out and give it to John instead. Now John eventually starts to make his way upstairs, but he's trying extra hard to be quiet. John again doesn't know why he's doing this, why he's going up so quietly. Now when John goes upstairs to the front door, he realizes that his plans to going outside aren't feasible anymore. Turns out it's not daytime, it's actually the night. It's dark, gloomy, and windy outside. John decides to cancel his plans and instead just make the phone call. Now at this point, John decides to call his best friend Amy. And as he does this, he's actually starting to feel better. The fear, the uneasiness is starting to go away as he gets closer to his goal of just getting to speak to someone. In fact, he even starts to think to himself that he was being so foolish the whole time, thinking that something weird was going on, for no reason. So John eventually opens up his phone, speed dials Amy. It rings once and then just silence. Nothing. John eventually looks at his phone and notices he's still got a signal, the phone is still working. He's not exactly sure what went wrong, so he decides to redial her. But before he can do that, his phone rings all of a sudden. John, thinking that it might be Amy calling him back, opens the phone and puts it on his ear. But just like before, it's just silence. Nothing. John eventually breaks the silence and says hello, but hears nothing back. After a few minutes, the person on the other side said, "Hello, who is this?" John says his name, and eventually the other person responds, "Oh sorry, wrong number," and hangs up. John looks at his phone and sees that it was an unknown number. Who was that? John is completely unsure, but before he has a chance to think about it too much, the phone rings again. And this time, it's an unknown number as well. John puts the phone to his ear, but this time he doesn't say hello, he doesn't say anything, instead just waits. Eventually the silence is broken, not by John, but by Amy, who says, "John, are you there?" John and Amy at that point have the following conversation. "I breathed a sigh of relief," said John. "Hey, it's you," John replied. "Who else would it be?" Amy responded. "Oh, the number. I'm at a party on 7th Street, and my phone died just as you called me. This is someone else's phone, obviously." "Oh, okay," John said. "Where are you?" Amy asked. My eyes glanced over the drab, whitewashed cylinder block walls and the heavy metal door with the small window. "At my building," I sighed. Just feeling cooped up. "I didn't realize it was so late." "You should come here," Amy said, laughing. "Nah, I don't feel like looking for some strange place by myself in the middle of the night," John said. Looking at the window at the silent, windy street that secretly scared me just a tiny bit, "I think I'm just going to keep working or go to bed." "Nonsense," Amy replied. "I can come get you. Your building is close to 7th Street, right?" "How drunk are you?" John asked lightheartedly. "You know where I live." "Of course," Amy said abruptly. "I guess I can't get there by walking, huh?" "You could if you wanted to waste half an hour," John told her. "Right," Amy said. "Okay, have to go. Good luck with your work." John finally ends the phone call and leans back against the wall, thinking to himself, what was all that? John was hoping that talking to Amy would make him feel better, but he actually feels worse, because those two conversations were so strange. A random number calls him and then immediately hangs up, and even the conversation with Amy was kind of weird, especially her not knowing where he was relative to her. At this point, John looks outside at the dark, windy, and gloomy streets, and starts to think to himself that something might be out there, some sort of horrible monster waiting to get him, to grab him. We see once again that John is filled with fear, uncertainty, anxious. He doesn't know what's happening, but he knows that something is wrong, even if it sounds ridiculous. At this point, he decides to go back down to his apartment. In fact, he actually runs back down, but tries to be as quiet as possible like before. He eventually comes back to his desk and actually starts writing in his journal everything that we've discussed so far. He thinks back to the conversation that he had, starts to ponder on it. In the beginning, he does start to calm down and start feeling a little bit better, but soon the more and more he thinks about that conversation with Amy, the more and more nervous and fearful he becomes. He thinks back to the conversation and thinks that it was quite strange, that Amy was behaving strange. Why is it that she didn't know where he is relative to where she was? I mean, she is his best friend. She's most likely been to that apartment many times. Also, another strange thing that John noticed about that phone call was that there was no background noise. He didn't hear anything. I mean, she was at a party, so you would expect that there would be something behind her, some music or people talking. John thinks to himself that maybe she could have just been outside, but then John remembered that it was windy, but he didn't hear any wind. Eventually, John ends the journal by saying that he's going to go outside and see if it's still windy. Was it all just a coincidence? Is it all just irrational? John can't be sure at this point. At this point, the journal skips to Monday, the day after, and John begins the journal by writing about how he once again wants to go outside. When he finally awakens, the first thing he's going to do is go outside, get some lunch, and hopefully run into someone familiar and have a proper conversation. However, before he can do anything, he hears a sudden sound. Turns out it's thunder. Upon reaching the front door, he notices that there's quite a storm going on outside. It's raining hard and the window of the door is completely covered, making it hard to see outside. All he seems to see is vague shapes moving at odd angles. Vague shapes, odd angle. That's quite strange. However, at this point, John knows that he can't go outside just like the night before, but at the same time, he doesn't want to go back to his apartment. The same old, cramped, windowless place. So instead, he decides to explore his apartment building and go up to the top floor, the 3rd floor. John eventually goes up the stairs, opens the door, and enters a hallway. He walks down the hallway and notices something particular. Once again, there's no noise. It doesn't feel like anyone else is there. Of course, it is the middle of the day, so it's possible everyone could be out at work, or school, or a multitude of things. But this makes John feel quite uneasy. Makes him feel a little bit too alone. Even in his own apartment, he can't seem to feel anybody else there. Now, once again in this hallway, we see that John has a very active imagination. He starts to look at these doors. He starts to imagine them as being these monolith doors to other dimensions. Thinks to himself that there's some mystical going on. This active imagination we first saw on Sunday, when he was looking outside the window and starting to imagine that there was some wild monster outside, just waiting to get him. He's certainly seeming to get carried away again. But before he can think too much on this, he notices that there's a source of light at the end of the hallway, and then he remembers that there's a window on this floor. John rushes over to the window, hoping to look outside and see someone, see something. Again, he hasn't seen anyone for days. He's been locked up in his room. He tried to go outside, it was night. He tried to go outside again today, it's raining, but he just wants to see someone. He just wants some social interaction. So he hopes that he can look out the window, see other people there, and just feel somewhat normal. He rushes up to the window and tries to look outside. But once again, no luck. The window is being completely washed with rain and it's very hard to see anything or make anything out. He just stands by the windows trying to stare out, but at this point his imagination once again acts up. He starts to imagine that there's a monster outside potentially waiting for him. John was about to open the window, but before he did that, a sudden fear came into him. The same fear that he felt on Sunday night. He started to imagine that there might be something outside, a monster just like before, that might grab him and take him, so he decides not to open the door. It is quite strange how John is acting. A part of him really wants to go outside, really wants to interact, but then there's another part of him that's holding him back, that's putting fear in him and stopping him from going outside. It's almost as if he has two sides to him right now, two sides to his psyche. One that's pushing him to go outside, and then another one that's keeping him in. At this point, John comes up with an idea to see if there really is something outside. He's going to run down to his apartment, grab a webcam, bring it back, set it up, fling the window open, and see if it catches anything while he runs away. However, he realizes that it's probably not going to be possible to bring a webcam up here. So instead, he changes the plan. Instead, he's going to take the webcam into his hallway in the basement and set it up at the end of the hallway between the two soda machines. Then, he's going to run up to the front door, fling it open, run back into his apartment, and see if he can catch anything. See if there really is a monster out there. So, he does exactly that. Flings the door open, runs back into his apartment, and then watches on his computer to see if he can catch anything on the webcam. But as he sits there watching, he sees nothing, hears nothing. Turns out, maybe this monster was just in his imagination. However, as he's on his computer, he notices something. Someone's finally online. At this point, most of his friends have been away or offline, but seeing that one of his friends was finally online, he decides to take this opportunity to talk. He grabs another webcam and sets it up on his computer, and he really hopes that he can talk to this one friend who has just come online. John finally sets up his webcam and has a short discussion with his friend. Turns out his friend was in a rush, so couldn't really say much. After the conversation, John sits back and finally calms down. He's finally had the conversation that he wanted, the interaction that he wanted. He got to speak to someone finally, and he starts to feel better. The paranoia, the fear, it starts to drift away. However, before it can be completely gone, John starts to think again. His imagination comes back in full force. When he thinks back to that conversation, he notices that that conversation was strange. Just like the conversation he had with Amy and the unknown caller. He can't remember anything. He can't remember any of the names, places, or anything that was mentioned in that conversation. The whole conversation seemed so mundane and strange. However, before his friend left, he did ask John for his email so he could get back to him. But then, wait. Looks like John just got an email. He receives an email from Amy and writes the following in his journal. I'm about to go out. I just got an email from Amy that asked me to meet her for dinner at the place we usually go to. I do love pizza, and I've been eating random food from my poorly stocked fridge for days, so I can't wait. Again, I feel ridiculous about the odd couple of days I've been having. I should destroy this journal when I get back. Oh, another email. Once again, we're back to the same pattern with John. He's feeling fine, he's normal, but then all of a sudden, fear, paranoia comes rushing into his mind. He starts to overthink things, starts to imagine the worst. Then, once again, calms down, starts to rationalize, but before he can completely relax, the fear comes rushing back. And that's exactly what we're about to see again after he's done with this email from Amy. Another thing I find a little interesting about this email is that Amy says, let's meet at our usual place. Once again, it seems like people around John are being vague. John is about to leave his apartment to go meet Amy, hoping that he finally will get to see someone in person. But before he can leave, he gets another email. John writes the following in his journal. Oh my God, I almost left the email and opened the door. I almost opened the door. I almost opened the door, but I read the email first. It was from a friend I haven't heard for in a long time, and it was sent to a huge number of emails. That must have been every person he had saved in his address list. It had no subject, and it said simply, seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, and just cuts off at that point. John looks at this email, and he's bewildered. What does this even mean? The email had no subject, it's a cut-off sentence. Why was this sent? Is this a spam? Is this a virus? Is this something else? John thinks to himself that this email must have been sent in a hurry. But why? What could possibly be happening that would require someone to send an email to such a huge number of people and not even complete a thought? The email was sent with haste, and it's definitely incomplete. Now John looks at this email and combines it with the other odd things that have been happening to him. The strange phone calls, the feelings that there might be something outside, the vague conversations, all of that combined together makes John even more suspicious and more afraid of what could be happening. Especially the part with seeing with your eyes. That really resonates with John, because guess what? John hasn't really seen anyone with his eyes. For the last few days, he has not seen a single soul. Not in his apartment, not outside his door, not outside the window on the 3rd floor. In fact, when he went up to the front door and looked out the window, all he saw was vague shapes walking in odd angles. What could be going on? What does this mean? Is this email a warning? Is there something strange happening in the world right now? These are sort of thoughts that flush through John's mind. Again, over the past few days, John has had no conversations. Well, except for the webcam conversation he had with his friend. But again, remember, that conversation felt off. Weird, eerie, strange. But if there is something strange going on, and there are monsters, who are they? Where are they coming from? And how come John can't see them? Is that what seen with your eyes is a reference to? The monsters? At this point, John writes the following in his journal. My mind toys with the progression of events I've written here, pointing out that I have not been presented with one single fact that I did not specifically give out, unsuspectingly. The random wrong number that got my name, and the subsequent strange return call from Amy. The friend that asked for my email address, I messaged him first when I saw him online, and then I got my first email a few minutes after that conversation. Oh my God. The phone call with Amy, I said over the phone. I said that I was within half an hour walks of 7th Street. They know I'm here. What if they're trying to find me? Where is everyone else? Why haven't I seen or heard anyone else in days? At this point, John's paranoia has come back full force, and he's working overtime. He thinks back to everything that's happened in the last few days. In the beginning, John just had a weird feeling when he left his apartment. Then he started to imagine there was a monster outside. And then he started to imagine that there was another monster by the window on the 3rd floor. In the beginning, he just thought these were weird feelings, but now he's really starting to consider that they might be real. At this point, he thinks that there's something happening. Something strange happened out there, that there's something out there getting his friends, out there trying to get him. He thinks there might be a vast conspiracy out there. He thinks that these monsters might be pretending to be his friends, to get his information, to get him, to find his location. He thinks they know his location because he revealed it to Amy, or at least what might be Amy. He told Amy that he was only 30 minutes away from 7th Street. However, it is pretty strange. One of the interesting things that John mentions is that every fact that's been presented to him was based on something that he gave out first. Remember, he got a strange phone call, he gave him their name. Then what happens? He gets a call from Amy, and the only fact that she's able to mention about him is his name. She doesn't even remember that he lives close by. Quite strange. You would think that your own best friend would know where you live. Another strange thing was that he reached out to his friend online and gave him his email. And immediately after that, he gets an email from who? Amy. And in that email, Amy asks him to go eat at the usual place. She doesn't mention a word. She doesn't mention anything. No information that he himself hasn't given out. Another thing that's interesting is that it's always Amy reaching out to him after he gives out this information. Could the monsters be aware that Amy is close to him and that's why they're using her? Amy this whole time has been asking John to go outside. First she asks him to come to the party, then she asks him to come to the place that they usually eat at? Is Amy trying to get him to come outside so maybe the monsters outside want him to come outside, and they're just using Amy's persona for that purpose. That's just a theory that I've developed myself. After all this, John finally sits back down and starts to calm down. This has to be crazy. This can't be real. This is ridiculous. But just like before, rationalizing quickly turns into fear and panic. John pulls out his phone. He needs to contact somebody. He needs to talk to somebody. He needs to speak to somebody. The social isolation, being alone, is really starting to get at him. He pulls out his phone, but remember, he's getting no signal. He rushes around his apartment trying to find something. Finally, he goes into his bathroom, stands on his bathtub, and finally gets a signal in one of the corners. He quickly starts to send out text messages to everyone, asking them if they've seen anyone face to face lately. While he's giving out these conversations, he's not giving out any facts, no personal information, because he knows that this could potentially be used against him. At this point, John is desperate for a response. He texts everybody, he tries calling people, but no one picks up. He rushes over to his computer and starts typing and messages everyone on his list. He knows he might sound crazy, he might sound insane, but he just needs to speak to someone. He needs to know that the world is normal and that everyone is still there. Over time, his messages grow more and more frantic. He doesn't care if anyone thinks he's crazy. He even starts inviting people to his apartment because, again, he just wants to see someone. He just wants to know that everything is normal. His desperation is growing and growing and growing. He ultimately just wants to prove that the world is normal, that it hasn't been taken over by monsters, and that he isn't just all alone. At this point, I do wonder if John is becoming insane. I mean, how could monsters take over the world and John notices nothing? I mean, sure, he's been cooped up in his room for a couple days, but can the whole world truly get taken over? I mean, wouldn't if someone messaged, someone sent more warnings? Quite illogical. I mean, he was just sitting in his room doing a programming project and the whole world gets taken away? Well, I guess on the plus side, he doesn't have to hand it in. But of course, I'm pretty sure he would prefer that the world would remain normal. John ends the entry for Monday by saying that he tore his apartment apart, looking for something that he could use to contact the outside world. He eventually ends the entry by saying that he's gonna tape his phone to the ceiling just in case, to make sure that he doesn't lose a signal. And that's how the entry for Monday ends. At this point, it's kind of hard to say what's really going on. Is John going crazy? Or is everything true? Remember, the most important thing we have to realize is that this is John's journal. He's the narrator. There is no third-party account. There is no neutral, objective point of view. It's all John. So if he is going crazy, we can't really believe everything that he's saying, and we have to cast doubt. But again, we'll find out more as the story goes on, and you can judge for yourself for whether or not this is real or just insanity. Tuesday. John now sits down at his desk and starts to write down the events of Tuesday. As he wakes up in the morning, he is startled. The phone rings. He rushes over, picks it up quickly, holding it in the corner to make sure that he doesn't lose the signal. As he says hello, he notices that it's Amy. She saw his messages, and she's been trying desperately to contact him, ever since their last discussion on Sunday actually. She tells John that she's going to come over. She got very worried about his frantic messaging and just wants to come see him. At this point, she doesn't ask him about his location and just happens to know. Now this does bring some relief to John, because this makes him think that she has to be the real Amy, because he never said anything about his location. He never said where he was. So her knowing by herself has to mean that she's the real Amy and not some fake impersonator. At this point, John once again calms down. Relief comes over him, and he starts to think about just how foolish he's been this whole time. In fact, he even thinks about throwing away the journal, thinking that this is all ridiculous, that the journal is actually making things worse, that him writing things down and overthinking everything is making him more paranoid. However, this calm is temporary, and it will break again, as we'll see later on. John remarks the following in his journal. I don't even know why I'm writing in it now. Maybe it's just because it's the only communication I've had all since God knows when. I look like hell too. I looked in the mirror before I came back in here. My eyes are sunken, my stubble is thicker, and I just look generally unhealthy. My apartment is trashed, but I'm not going to clean it up. I think I need someone else to see what I've been through. These past few days have not been normal. I am not one to imagine things. I know I've been the victim of extreme probability. I probably missed seeing another person a dozen times. I just happen to go out when it's late at night, or the middle of the day, or when everyone was gone. Everything's perfectly fine. I know this now. Plus, I found something in the closet last night that I think has helped me tremendously. A television. I set it up just before I wrote this, and it's on in the background. Television has always been an escape for me, and it reminds me that there's a world beyond these dingy brick walls. Once again, we see John trying to rationalize the situation. He is a programmer after all, so thinking logically and looking at the facts is probably normal to him. Everything that's happened is just probability. It's just chance, right? Again, John realizes that what he really needs is social interaction. He needs to go outside and touch some grass. But at the same time, what if he's right? What if the world has been taken over by monsters? What if everyone really is gone? And if John goes outside himself, isn't he screwed? Of course, this is something that we'll find out later in the story. At this point, it's still a guessing game, because John is being quite unreliable. We know his mental state is unstable, so trusting everything that he says probably isn't the most reliable way to go at it. Anyway, John expresses next in the journal how happy he is that Amy is the one that responded to him. Again, Amy's his best friend. They go way back. If anyone can help him in this situation, if anyone can make him feel better, it's going to be her. It is so interesting how it's always Amy that seems to respond to him. How it's almost Amy that's trying to contact him. She called him after he sent out the frantic messages. She emailed him when no one else was, and she was the only person to have any conversation with him on the phone. It is pretty strange, but again, this could just be probability. But again, before John can think too much about it, there's a knock at the door. John goes up to the door and he wonders to himself if this really is Amy, or if this could be something else. He goes over to his computer to look through the webcam, the same webcam that he has set up at the end of the hallway between the two soda machines. But he can't seem to see anything. Could it just be bad positioning? He eventually talks through the computer. The webcam itself has speakers in it, and he calls out to Amy and tells her about the camera that he has set up. Amy walks over to the camera, looks into it, and smiles. John tells her that this must be weird. He's been having a very bad few days recently, and Amy simply responds, "Must have." Amy at this point asks him to open the door so she can come in. But is this Amy? These are the thoughts that rush through John's mind. You see, John is still paranoid. He has to be sure. He has to make sure that Amy is really there. So he decides to test her, ask her a question that only the real Amy would know. He asks Amy to say something about them, to say something about John, something that only he or she would know. And Amy decides to bring up a particular story from their past about how they first met. Amy is weirded out by the request, but she essentially recounts how they randomly met at a playground once, a playground that they were both too old to be in. John was relieved by this response, and the fear faded again, just as quickly as it arrived. Again, we see the same pattern. He's paranoid, he's afraid, and then he turns and he's calm and relaxed. But of course, we know there's a pattern. We know that this level of calmness will be followed with more paranoia and more fright. Again, for the current time, this is enough to convince him. Of course, this is the only thing the real Amy would know. No way that anyone impersonating her could possibly figure this information out, because there wasn't really anyone else there, only them two. John at this point runs to the bathroom to fix his hair. He walks to the door and places his hand on the doorknob, once again realizing how ridiculous he has been. But again, like I said before, there's a pattern, and the fear comes rushing back into him. As he begins to open the door, he notices that the webcam in his room, the same webcam he had a strange chat earlier in the week. John writes the following in his journal. Its silent black spear lay haphazardly tossed to the side, its lens pointed at the table where his journal lay. An overwhelming terror took me as I realized if something could see through the camera, it would have seen just what I wrote about the day. I asked her for any one thing about us, and she chose the only thing in the world that I thought they or I did not know, but it did know. It could have been watching me the whole time. Fear, paranoia, and irrationality are rushing back into John, overcoming his senses again. Did the monsters know? Could they have been watching? How much do they know? How many details could they have? How can they use this against him? These thoughts race through his mind. But again, why are they trying so hard to trick John into going outside? If they really want him, can't they just break down the door and come in and take him by force? It's all really strange. But regardless, John refuses to open the door. In fact, he starts to scream and scream loudly. He destroys his webcam. The door begins to shake and the doorknob tries to turn, but he can't hear him. Is it because the door is too thick? At this point, wouldn't she be calling out to him, asking him what's going on, if he's okay? But he can't hear anything. I mean, is that Amy? If not her, then what? Is it a monster? Amy eventually leaves, but John continues to scream for help. He eventually ends his journal for Friday by saying that he piled everything against the door and barricaded himself inside, refusing to leave, knowing that there's something out there, something after him. Now, one thing that's weird about that whole interaction is Amy. See, Amy was fully aware that John's been going kind of crazy, frantically messaging people, acting irrational. But she shows up and she's calm, not really concerned, doesn't even ask him how he's doing. And then once he starts to scream and panic, she says nothing. Silence. Again, it could be because the door was too thick or something, but it's all really weird. And the weirdest thing is that she leaves and doesn't return for 3 days. This is something that we'll see later on. But again, this is Amy, his best friend. If she really cared about him, she'd be back the same day with paramedics, police, whatever. But she doesn't come back for 3 days. She just leaves. And John eventually goes to sleep. I mean, if it was me and my best friend was acting this way, I would get the authorities on the same exact day and try to solve this problem. I wouldn't leave my friend in that state. It's also strange. Maybe John is onto something. Earlier on Sunday, Amy didn't seem to know exactly where John even lived. This whole time, Amy's been acting very strange. But the journal eventually ends, and John writes nothing else for the day. In fact, he doesn't write anything for the next few days, as the next entry is on Friday. Wednesday and Thursday are left blank. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. This is the end of part 1. I'm still working on part 2, which I'm hoping will be out in like, I don't know, maybe a week or so. I'm kind of lazy, but I'll try to work on as much as I can and get that out soon. But yeah, if you watched this long, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please comment, subscribe. I'm still kind of new to this whole thing, so if you guys have any, criticism or advice, you guys can put that down in the comments. I'm definitely hoping to increase the production of my videos or increase the rate and everything like that as time goes on. I'm still kind of busy at work, but things should die down soon, so I'll be able to put more time in. But yeah, so I'm going to release part 2 hopefully next week. After that, I was actually thinking about making a video related to like conspiracy theories that actually were true. I think that video will be really interesting. But yeah, so if you guys want to see that sort of stuff, please like, subscribe, and hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.